A Nobel Peace Prize winner recently delivered a stark assessment to the BBC concerning the conflict in Ukraine. The laureate asserts that Russian President Vladimir Putin can no longer legitimately claim victory. This pronouncement marks a critical juncture in how the international community, and indeed Russia's domestic audience, perceives the ongoing war. The analysis centers on a singular, defining challenge facing the Kremlin, a strategic impasse that offers no clear path forward. This perspective challenges conventional narratives surrounding the conflict's progression, pushing for a deeper examination of Russia's current position. The Nobel Laureate articulates the core issue as Putin being trapped in a strategic stalemate. This isn't merely a tactical deadlock, it signifies a deeper, systemic problem for Moscow. Military analysts, echoing this sentiment, suggest that significant territorial advances for either side have become increasingly difficult. Frontlines remain largely static across vast swaths of eastern and southern Ukraine, despite continued, high-intensity engagements. This stasis, according to the laureate, prevents any conclusive military triumph that could be leveraged as a victory narrative, creating a complex and enduring challenge for the Russian leadership. Central to the laureate's analysis is Putin's inability to sell a definitive victory to his domestic audience. Initial Kremlin narratives focused on rapid success and denazification. However, with the war now in its third year, such claims are increasingly difficult to sustain. Propaganda efforts face mounting pressure to explain the prolonged conflict and the high human cost. Russian state media continues to frame the conflict as a necessary operation, yet the lack of decisive gains poses a significant challenge for maintaining widespread public support. The disconnect between official rhetoric and on-ground realities deepens, eroding the credibility of victory claims. Conversely, the laureate points out that Putin cannot afford to back down without risking his regime's survival. A full withdrawal or an admission of failure would represent a catastrophic loss of face. For a leader who has meticulously cultivated an image of strength and unwavering resolve, such a retreat could trigger significant internal dissent. Political analysts suggest that a perceived defeat might empower opposition elements, even within the elite, challenging the stability of the current power structure. The perceived consequences of backing down are therefore monumental, locking Putin into the current trajectory despite the stalemate. This no-win, no-quit scenario, described by the Nobel laureate, draws parallels with historical precedents where regimes faced existential threats due to military adventurism. While each conflict is unique, observers note that prolonged, costly wars without clear objectives often destabilize leadership. For Russia, a history of strong leadership and territorial integrity is deeply ingrained. Any perceived weakness in Ukraine challenges this national narrative. The current stalemate, therefore, becomes not just a military problem, but a profound political and historical one for the Kremlin, reinforcing the trap Putin finds himself in. Military assessments confirm the operational gridlock identified by the Nobel laureate. Reports from various intelligence agencies consistently highlight a lack of significant breakthroughs for either side since late 2022. Defensive fortifications, extensive minefields, and the proliferation of drones have transformed the battlefield into a highly attritional environment. This reality starkly contrasts with initial Russian objectives of rapid territorial control. The current situation suggests that neither side possesses the overwhelming advantage required to achieve decisive victory in the near term, solidifying the strategic stalemate at the heart of the laureate's argument. The human cost of this prolonged stalemate, though not directly part of the Nobel laureate's BBC quote, is an undeniable factor contributing to the no definitive victory dilemma. International human rights organizations and independent monitors report staggering casualty figures on both sides. For the domestic audience in Russia, while official figures are tightly controlled, the cumulative impact of mobilized men not returning, or returning with severe injuries, is difficult to conceal indefinitely. This heavy toll drains public morale and makes any victory seem increasingly hollow, even if achieved, further complicating Putin's narrative. The economic ramifications of the protracted war further underpin the Nobel laureate's point about selling victory domestically. While Russia's economy has shown resilience against Western sanctions, significant resources are diverted to the military effort. Reports indicate that social spending and investment in other sectors may be feeling the strain. For ordinary Russian citizens, inflationary pressures and the long-term impact of isolation could erode living standards. This economic burden, when combined with the human cost, makes any victory declaration a harder sell, as the average citizen weighs the benefits against the tangible sacrifices. The ongoing Western sanctions regime, while not delivering a knockout blow, contributes to Russia's strategic predicament. Economic analysts suggest that while Moscow has found alternative markets and supply chains, the long-term impact on technological access, industrial development, and overall economic diversification remains significant. The laureate's perspective implies that these pressures are not severe enough to force an immediate withdrawal, yet they are substantial enough to prevent a decisive, resource-rich push for victory. This creates a painful equilibrium, trapping Russia in a slow burn of economic attrition without a clear path to resolution. The Kremlin's propaganda apparatus faces an intensifying challenge, reconciling the official narrative of success with the evident strategic stalemate. Media observers note a shift in rhetoric, emphasizing resilience and confronting a collective West rather than celebrating specific battlefield victories. This reframing attempts to manage public expectations. However, as the Nobel Laureate implies, this pivot itself acknowledges the absence of a definitive triumph. The constant adjustment of narratives underscores the difficulty in presenting a victory when tangible gains are minimal, further highlighting the precariousness of Putin's domestic messaging. While direct polling in Russia is complex and often unreliable, anecdotal evidence and some independent surveys suggest a nuanced shift in public mood. Initial patriotic fervor has given way to a more subdued resignation among segments of the population. The Nobel Laureate's observation about the inability to sell victory aligns with this. As the war becomes a normalized, albeit costly, backdrop, the emotional energy required for mass mobilization behind a victorious agenda diminishes. This quiet weariness, if widespread, poses a long-term threat to the Kremlin's ability to sustain the war effort without facing increased internal pressure. The partial mobilization initiated in late 2022 carries a significant legacy, directly impacting the domestic audience dilemma. It directly brought the war into countless Russian homes, dispelling any illusion of a distant, professional military operation. This personal connection to the conflict means the costs are no longer abstract. The Nobel Laureate's assessment implies that after such a direct societal intervention, a less than definitive outcome becomes a harder pill for the population to swallow. The experience of mobilization deepens the public's investment in the war's outcome, intensifying the pressure for a clear victory or at least a credible resolution. The ongoing international isolation of Russia, while not explicitly mentioned in the Nobel Laureate's quote, is a contextual factor exacerbating Putin's predicament. Diplomatically, Russia finds itself increasingly reliant on a limited number of partners, while much of the world condemns the invasion. This isolation affects not only trade and finance but also Russia's soft power and geopolitical influence. For a leader aiming to restore Russia's global standing, a prolonged stalemate that achieves no clear victory while deepening international pariah status creates a compounding problem. This makes any domestic claim of victory harder to reconcile with global realities. The Nobel Laureate's focus on regime survival highlights the deep-seated concern within the Kremlin. Putin's leadership, for decades, has been built on an image of stability, strength, and restoration of Russian prestige. Any perceived failure in Ukraine threatens this fundamental foundation. The current system relies heavily on loyalty from key power brokers and a carefully managed elite. A military setback or a protracted, unwinnable war could fracture this loyalty, leading to internal challenges. This makes retreating from Ukraine a risk not just to policy, but to the very architecture of Putin's power. Within Russia, a vocal faction of hardliners advocates for an even more aggressive prosecution of the war. These figures, often prominent in media and political circles, demand decisive action and criticize any perceived lack of resolve. The Nobel Laureate's point about the inability to back down resonates deeply with this internal dynamic. Retreating would not only alienate this influential group but also potentially empower them to challenge Putin's leadership from a position of not being tough enough. This internal pressure further restricts Putin's options, pushing him towards maintaining the stalemate rather than seeking a compromise. Putin's personal legacy and his carefully constructed role in Russia's historical narrative are also at stake. His rule has been largely defined by restoring what he perceives as Russia's rightful place on the global stage and reversing the perceived humiliations of the post-Soviet era. A failure in Ukraine, particularly one involving retreat without clear gains, would fundamentally undermine this legacy. Historians suggest that leaders often prioritize their place in history, even over pragmatic solutions. For Putin, the Ukraine war has become inextricably linked to his historical standing, making any backing down an impossible choice. Reports from various defense ministries indicate that Russia's military capabilities have suffered significant attrition since the full-scale invasion began. While Moscow has demonstrated an ability to reconstitute forces and adapt, the quality of some newly mobilized troops and equipment remains a concern for military strategists. The Nobel Laureate's strategic stalemate implies that even with these efforts, Russia lacks the capacity for a swift, decisive victory. This attrition makes grand offensive operations challenging to sustain, further cementing the current gridlock and making any victory proclamation ring hollow to a discerning global audience. Continued Western military and financial support for Ukraine plays a crucial role in perpetuating the stalemate. Without this sustained aid, many analysts believe Ukraine's defensive capabilities would be severely hampered. The Nobel Laureate's assessment implicitly acknowledges this dynamic. Western assistance enables Ukraine to resist Russian advances, thereby preventing a Russian victory. At the same time, this support is not always sufficient for Ukraine to achieve a decisive breakthrough either, thus reinforcing the trap for Putin. The balance of power remains delicate, contributing to the prolonged, attritional nature of the conflict. The information war runs parallel to the military stalemate, intensifying the domestic audience dilemma for Putin. While Russia's state-controlled media propagates a specific narrative, access to alternative information, however limited, persists. International media and social media platforms continue to challenge the Kremlin's version of events. This constant battle for narratives means that selling a definitive victory requires not just military success but also a complete control over public perception, which is increasingly difficult in the digital age. The Nobel Laureate's perspective acknowledges this complex information landscape. The absence of a clear exit strategy for Moscow reinforces the trap Putin finds himself in, as observed by the Nobel Laureate. Analysts point out that neither a military defeat nor a full military victory appears achievable in the short to medium term. Diplomatic avenues are largely stalled, with both sides setting preconditions that remain irreconcilable. This lack of a viable off-ramp means Russia continues to pour resources into a conflict that yields diminishing returns, yet cannot be abandoned. The situation is a testament to the profound strategic miscalculations that preceded the full-scale invasion. The economic cost of the war on Russia is substantial, directly contributing to Putin's domestic challenge. While exact figures are debated, the diversion of state resources is undeniable. Defense spending has dramatically increased, significantly impacting the federal budget. The Nobel Laureate's claim of inability to sell victory is underscored by these numbers, as they represent tangible sacrifices for an elusive win. As a Nobel Peace Prize winner, the laureate's perspective is inherently rooted in the pursuit of peaceful resolution and the prevention of human suffering. Their analysis of Putin's trap is not merely a military or political assessment, but a moral one. It highlights the futility of continued conflict when a definitive victory is unreachable for Russia and retreat is perceived as regime-ending. This moral dimension underscores the urgency of finding a path out of the stalemate, a path that currently appears blocked by the very dynamics the laureate identifies. The internal political dynamics within Russia are complex, with various factions holding different stakes in the war's outcome. The Nobel Laureate's assertion about regime survival acknowledges these intricate power plays. A prolonged stalemate without a clear win could lead to increased factionalism, as different groups within the elite might seek to either double down or find alternatives. The careful balancing act Putin performs to maintain consensus among these groups becomes increasingly difficult under conditions of strategic uncertainty and mounting costs. This internal pressure cooker further complicates any decision-making regarding the war. Ukraine's unexpected resilience and strong national unity have fundamentally altered Russia's initial invasion plans, directly contributing to the strategic stalemate. The Nobel Laureate's analysis implicitly recognizes this crucial factor. Ukrainian resistance, combined with effective adaptation to modern warfare and significant Western aid, has denied Russia the swift victory it initially sought. This sustained defense prevents Putin from presenting a clear win, forcing him into a prolonged, costly conflict he cannot easily extricate himself from. Ukraine's ability to hold its ground is a cornerstone of the current impasse. Vladimir Putin has meticulously crafted an image of a decisive, strong leader, both domestically and internationally. The strategic stalemate in Ukraine significantly challenges this carefully constructed persona. The Nobel Laureate's observation directly addresses this erosion of image. A leader unable to secure a victory or retreat gracefully risks being perceived as weak or ineffective. This perception, if it solidifies, could have profound long-term consequences for his standing and influence, reinforcing the regime's survival concern. The war's outcome is now a direct referendum on Putin's leadership abilities. The conflict has evolved beyond simple military objectives, complicating any notion of victory. What would a Russian victory even look like now? Analysts suggest that initial goals like denazification or demilitarization have become vague and unattainable. The Nobel Laureate's point about selling a definitive victory domestically is challenged by this ambiguity. Without clear, achievable military and political objectives, it becomes exceedingly difficult to declare success, even if some territorial gains are made. The very definition of victory remains elusive, trapping Putin in an unwinnable narrative battle. The war has triggered significant regional geopolitical shifts, further complicating Russia's strategic position. Countries like Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, strengthening the alliance's eastern flank. This expansion represents a strategic setback for Moscow, directly contradicting one of Russia's stated security concerns. The Nobel Laureate's assessment of a stalemate encompasses these broader strategic losses. While Russia may hold ground in Ukraine, the wider geopolitical landscape has shifted disadvantageously for the Kremlin, making any victory claim within Ukraine appear pyrrhic in the larger context. The diplomatic front remains largely frozen, echoing the military stalemate identified by the Nobel Laureate. Numerous international efforts to broker peace have faltered, primarily due to fundamental disagreements on preconditions. Ukraine demands full territorial integrity and war reparations, while Russia insists on its annexation claims. This irreconcilable gap means neither side is willing to compromise sufficiently to achieve a lasting peace or a credible ceasefire. The diplomatic impasse reinforces the trap. Without a negotiated end, the costly military stalemate persists, with no easy way out for Putin. The Nobel Laureate's analysis implies profound long-term consequences for Russia, regardless of the immediate battlefield outcome. A protracted stalemate drains resources, isolates the country, and potentially stunts its future development. This creates a scenario where even if Russia avoids an outright defeat, it still faces a future diminished by the ongoing conflict. This slow decay is not a victory that can be celebrated, nor is it a sustainable path. The laureate's perspective urges a look beyond immediate military gains to the broader, generational impact of the strategic trap. The strategic stalemate represents an unprecedented leadership test for Vladimir Putin. His response has been characterized by a doubling down on military efforts and a tightening of domestic control. This approach, while maintaining his grip on power for now, also limits his flexibility to adapt. The Nobel Laureate's assessment highlights that this rigidity is part of the trap. Putin's established leadership style makes it difficult for him to admit miscalculation or pivot, thus prolonging the very conditions that prevent a definitive victory or a safe retreat. This adherence to a rigid strategy contributes directly to the impasse. The ambiguity surrounding Russia's ultimate war aims and potential end states adds another layer to Putin's predicament. As the Nobel Laureate suggests, it's hard to claim victory when the definition of victory itself is opaque and shifting. Is it territorial conquest? Neutralization of Ukraine? Eradication of perceived threats? The lack of a consistent, achievable goal makes public messaging difficult and prevents the formulation of a clear exit strategy. This ambiguity prolongs the conflict, incurring continuous costs, and exacerbates the no definitive victory problem for Putin. Beyond Russia and Ukraine, the strategic stalemate has profound implications for the global order. It challenges established norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity, creating instability. The Nobel Laureate's analysis of Putin's trap resonates with these broader concerns. A prolonged, unwinnable conflict involving a major power creates a dangerous precedent and distracts from other pressing global challenges. The inability of one leader to find a graceful exit impacts international peace and security, highlighting the interconnectedness of this conflict with the wider world. Russia's extensive information control apparatus is crucial for managing the domestic narrative, but even it struggles with the strategic stalemate. The Nobel Laureate's point about difficulty selling victory implies a breaking point for even the most stringent propaganda. While the state media can suppress dissenting voices, it cannot entirely invent tangible successes on the battlefield. Reports suggest a subtle shift in tone, focusing more on endurance and collective struggle rather than triumphant advancements. This reflects the challenge of maintaining credibility when factual victories are elusive. Demographic pressures within Russia add another layer of complexity to the war's sustainability, touching upon the Nobel Laureate's no definitive victory observation. Russia already faced a challenging demographic outlook before the war. The casualties, combined with emigration of young, educated individuals, exacerbate these long-term trends. This drains the country of vital human capital. For a leader trying to project strength and secure a future, these demographic losses make any victory more costly and less meaningful, further eroding the domestic appeal of the conflict. The conflict has devolved into a cycle of attrition, where both sides seek to exhaust the other's resources, manpower, and will. This brutal reality underpins the Nobel Laureate's strategic stalemate. Each incremental gain comes at an enormous cost, preventing the decisive breakthrough needed for a clear victory. For Putin, this means continuously feeding resources into a meat grinder without a tangible endpoint. The cycle of attrition guarantees that a definitive victory remains out of reach, trapping Russia in a draining and seemingly endless conflict, with profound implications for regime stability. The risk of internal dissension within Russia presents a significant threat to Putin's regime. The Nobel Laureate highlights this as a key factor preventing him from backing down. We can compare the risks of backing down versus continuing the stalemate. Both carry inherent dangers for the Kremlin, demonstrating the narrow path Putin must navigate. The Nobel Peace Prize winner's statement serves as a critical call for clarity in assessing the Ukraine conflict. By directly addressing Putin's inability to claim victory and the dangers of retreat, the laureate compels a realistic evaluation of the war's trajectory. This perspective moves beyond daily battlefield reports to the strategic and political realities facing the Kremlin. It highlights that the current path is neither sustainable nor leading to a desirable outcome for Russia, underscoring the urgency for a shift in approach, even if Putin is currently unable to make one. The perspective from the global south, while varied, often highlights concerns about the broader economic impact of the war, including food and energy prices, rather than strictly aligning with Western condemnation. The Nobel Laureate's analysis resonates here by showing the futility of a prolonged conflict for Russia itself. A victory that doesn't alleviate global economic strain and only deepens international instability holds little appeal for these nations. Putin's inability to present a decisive win thus diminishes Russia's standing even among potentially neutral parties, affecting its ability to project influence globally. Russia's war aims have visibly shifted over time, creating confusion and making a definitive victory harder to articulate. What started with claims of denazification and demilitarization evolved into securing specific territories and protecting Russian speakers. This evolution, observed by analysts, underpins the Nobel Laureate's statement about Putin's domestic audience challenge. It's difficult to sell victory when the goalposts are constantly moving. This list illustrates some key shifts in declared Russian war objectives. The cost of indecision, or rather the inability to decide on a clear path, is central to the Nobel laureate's assessment. Putin is caught between two unpalatable options: pressing on with an unwinnable war or risking his regime by withdrawing. This paralysis of choice prolongs the conflict, multiplies its costs, and deepens Russia's isolation. For the Russian people, this means continued sacrifice without a clear end in sight. The laureate's statement lays bare the profound strategic bind, where the lack of a viable decision becomes a decision itself, with devastating consequences. The Nobel Peace Prize winner's impactful statements were made during a recent interview with the BBC. This attribution is crucial for understanding the context and reach of these comments. The BBC, a globally respected news organization, provides a platform that amplifies such significant analyses. By choosing this medium, the laureate's message reaches an international audience, further solidifying the narrative of Russia's strategic predicament and Putin's difficult position. The interview has since been widely reported, sparking further debate on the war's future. The very definition of victory in modern warfare has become complex, impacting Putin's ability to claim one. Traditional concepts of conquest and unconditional surrender are often elusive in protracted conflicts. The Nobel laureate's assessment implicitly questions what a Russian victory would entail that would satisfy both domestic and international audiences, and justify the immense cost. Is it the fall of Kiev, which seems unattainable? Or control over specific regions, which comes with endless insurgency? This ambiguity further complicates Putin's narrative, trapping him in a battle for meaning as much as for territory. Despite the challenges, Putin's domestic political resilience should not be underestimated. His regime has demonstrated a capacity to absorb shocks, control information, and suppress dissent. This resilience allows him to maintain the strategic stalemate longer than many observers initially predicted. However, the Nobel laureate's argument suggests that this resilience has its limits, especially when a definitive victory cannot be delivered. The core issue remains: how long can a regime sustain a costly, unwinnable war without ultimately facing fundamental challenges to its stability? The war's prolonged impact extends deep into Russian society, influencing everything from education to family life. The Nobel laureate's comments on the domestic audience highlight this pervasive effect. Sociologists note shifts in social norms, increased censorship, and a growing sense of isolation. While some rally behind the flag, others experience quiet despair or seek to leave the country. This societal strain, when combined with the lack of clear victory, creates a fertile ground for discontent over time, challenging the Kremlin's ability to maintain public acquiescence indefinitely. Western sanctions aim to constrain Russia's war effort by targeting its economy. While Russia has adapted, the long-term impact on its industrial and technological base is significant. The Nobel laureate's analysis considers this as a factor contributing to the stalemate, preventing Russia from achieving a decisive victory. The peril of protraction, or a prolonged war, is a key element of the strategic trap described by the Nobel laureate. Each day the conflict continues, Russia expends more resources, suffers more casualties, and deepens its international isolation, all without nearing a decisive outcome. This protraction inherently works against the possibility of a definitive victory and exacerbates the risks to Putin's regime. The laureate's message is a warning against the illusion that time is on Russia's side, suggesting instead that it is trapped in an increasingly costly and unwinnable holding pattern. Maintaining the loyalty of Russia's political and economic elites is paramount for Putin's regime survival. The strategic stalemate tests this loyalty by imposing costs and uncertainties. Reports indicate that while open dissent is rare, quiet dissatisfaction may be growing among some segments who benefit from stability and international integration. The Nobel laureate's assessment implies that a continuous, unwinnable war puts increasing strain on these relationships. Any crack in elite loyalty could pose a significant threat, reinforcing Putin's inability to back down without fearing for his position. The current strategic stalemate creates a difficult choice for Putin, forcing a comparison between two undesirable outcomes for his regime. The Nobel laureate highlights this no-win, no-quit dilemma. On one hand, continuing the conflict means prolonged costs and no clear victory. On the other, a full withdrawal poses an existential threat to his leadership. This comparison underscores the depth of the trap. The Nobel Peace Prize winner's statement carries a moral imperative to recognize the human cost and geopolitical instability perpetuated by a conflict without a viable resolution. By framing Putin's situation as a trap, the laureate implies that rational actors, even those with authoritarian tendencies, should seek an off-ramp. This perspective is not about favoring one side, but about highlighting the unsustainable nature of the current path for all involved, especially Russia. It's a call to acknowledge reality and prioritize peace over a politically unachievable victory. The global impact of the strategic stalemate extends far beyond the immediate conflict zone. It fuels uncertainty in energy markets, disrupts supply chains, and diverts international attention and resources from other critical global issues. The Nobel Laureate's analysis underscores that this prolonged impasse is not a localized problem but a global one. The world is effectively held hostage by this trap, awaiting a resolution that seems increasingly distant. This broad impact makes the laureate's call for a realistic assessment all the more urgent for international stability. Given the Nobel Laureate's assessment, future scenarios for the Ukraine conflict offer no easy answers for Putin. Neither a clear military victory nor a politically safe withdrawal appears feasible. This leaves Russia in a continuous state of attrition, bleeding resources, and manpower. Analysts suggest this frozen conflict status, while maintaining some territorial gains, is far from the definitive victory required domestically. The trap implies a future of sustained conflict, punctuated by periods of intensified fighting, without a viable path to a conclusive end that serves Russia's long-term interests. The weight of expectations, both domestically and internationally, bears heavily on Putin's decisions. Domestically, he must manage the hopes of those who believe in a great Russia and have been mobilized for the war. Internationally, his actions are scrutinized by allies, adversaries, and neutral parties alike. The Nobel Laureate's analysis highlights how these expectations contribute to the trap. He cannot deliver the expected victory, yet cannot defy the expectations of strength by backing down. This creates an impossible bind, where every move is fraught with significant political risk. The Nobel Peace Prize winner's statement emphasizes that the true measure of success goes beyond mere military gains. It's about a sustainable peace and the welfare of people. This perspective frames the conflict not just as a battle for territory but for the future of a region and potentially the global order. The strategic stalemate implies a continuous drain on Russia's vital resources. This is not just about military hardware but extends to finances, human capital, and geopolitical influence. The Nobel Laureate's argument suggests these cumulative costs make a definitive victory increasingly unachievable and unsustainable for Russia in the long term. This list highlights key areas of resource depletion. The strategic trap described by the Nobel Laureate creates a vicious cycle. The inability to achieve victory fuels the need for continued effort, which in turn deepens the costs and makes retreat even more politically perilous. This cycle locks Putin into the current state of conflict, with each passing day making a graceful exit less likely and a definitive triumph more remote. Understanding this vicious cycle is crucial for comprehending the stalemate's enduring nature and its implications for both Russia and the wider world. From Ukraine's long-term perspective, the goal remains full territorial integrity and sovereignty. The strategic stalemate, while costly, is a testament to their unwavering resolve. For Ukraine, the Nobel Laureate's assessment of Putin's trap offers a degree of strategic affirmation. Russia cannot win decisively, yet cannot withdraw. This provides a clear, albeit difficult, path forward to continue resistance and secure sustained international support, waiting for the internal pressures on Putin's regime to potentially alter the geopolitical landscape in their favor. Despite stringent information controls, maintaining a complete blackout on the war's true costs and stalemate status is an enduring challenge for the Kremlin. Reports from independent journalists and analysts suggest that information, albeit fragmented, still seeps into Russian society. This makes the Nobel Laureate's point about selling a definitive victory even more pertinent. When citizens witness the impact of war firsthand, propaganda alone cannot indefinitely mask the absence of tangible gains. This constant struggle to control narratives further weakens Putin's position. The Kremlin's sacrifice narrative attempts to reframe the immense costs of the war not as a failure, but as a necessary trial in confronting external enemies. This narrative plays a crucial role in managing domestic discontent. However, the Nobel Laureate's analysis implies a breaking point for this narrative. How long can sacrifices be demanded without a clear, definitive victory to justify them? This rhetorical tightrope walk underscores the strategic bind. Putin must sustain a narrative of struggle without being able to promise a glorious end, further deepening the stalemate. The Ukraine conflict has become a geopolitical quagmire for Russia, as described by the Nobel Laureate's strategic stalemate. It drains resources, tarnishes international standing, and fails to achieve stated objectives, yet offers no graceful exit. This situation echoes historical examples of major powers bogged down in conflicts with unclear ends. For Russia, this quagmire is particularly damaging as it undermines its ambition to be a leading global power, exposing its limitations rather than demonstrating its strength. The trap ensures continued attrition without resolution. The threat of internal instability for Putin's regime is not just about popular dissent, but also about potential challenges from within the power structures. The Nobel Laureate's emphasis on regime survival acknowledges this multifaceted danger. Prolonged stalemate and mounting costs could embolden dissatisfied elements within the military, security services, or political elite. This internal pressure means that a retreat from Ukraine is perceived as too risky, pushing Putin to maintain the status quo even if it is strategically unsustainable. The true test of the regime's stability may still lie ahead. The authority of the Nobel Peace Prize winner lends significant weight to this assessment. Recipients are recognized globally for their work towards peace and human rights, giving their pronouncements a moral and ethical resonance. When such a figure states that Putin can no longer claim victory and is trapped, it carries more than just political analysis. It carries a condemnation of the war's futility and its immense human cost. This independent, moral authority shapes the international perception of the conflict, making it harder for Putin to manipulate narratives. To recap, the Nobel Peace Prize winner identifies a critical trap for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. This trap is characterized by multiple interconnected factors that deny a definitive victory while making retreat politically suicidal. The stalemate, domestic audience challenges, and regime survival risks form a complex web of constraints. This list summarizes the key elements of this strategic predicament, as outlined by the laureate. The Nobel Laureate's statement feeds into a broader global media narrative that increasingly questions Russia's capacity to achieve its stated objectives in Ukraine. This narrative, built on independent reporting, expert analysis, and official intelligence assessments, reinforces the idea of a bogged-down conflict. For Putin, this means battling not just on the ground, but also for international perception. The consensus that victory is out of reach further solidifies the strategic trap, making it difficult for the Kremlin to project an image of strength and success to the wider world. Ultimately, the Nobel Peace Prize winner presents a compelling case for a no-win scenario for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. Without the ability to secure a decisive military triumph, and with the political consequences of withdrawal being too severe, Putin is left with a perpetual, costly conflict. This no-win situation is the essence of the strategic trap, forcing Russia into an unsustainable long-term position. The laureate's analysis provides a stark, realistic assessment that challenges any lingering illusions of a possible Russian victory. The Nobel laureate's analysis suggests this trap is enduring, not a temporary setback. It is a fundamental condition of the conflict, born from Russia's initial miscalculations and Ukraine's sustained resistance. This enduring nature means that the costs will continue to mount, and the pressure on Putin's regime will only intensify over time. The stalemate is not merely a pause in fighting but a strategic reality that redefines the conflict's future, placing Putin in an increasingly untenable position with no clear exit. Looking ahead, the stakes remain incredibly high for all parties involved. For Russia, the strategic stalemate means a continued drain on its resources and a sustained threat to regime stability. For Ukraine, it means continued struggle for sovereignty and survival. For the international community, it means prolonged instability and humanitarian crisis. The Nobel Laureate's assessment serves as a crucial reminder of these stakes, urging a realistic understanding of the conflict's current trajectory and the urgent need for a path toward a just and lasting peace, however distant that may seem. In summary, the Nobel Peace Prize winner's analysis provides a critical lens on the Ukraine conflict. Putin is caught in a strategic stalemate, unable to claim victory domestically, yet unable to retreat without risking his regime. This situation is fueled by static frontlines, immense human and economic costs, sustained Ukrainian resilience, and a lack of clear diplomatic off-ramps. The consequences are profound, impacting Russia's domestic stability, global standing, and the broader international order. This investigative review underscores the complexity and the grim reality of this enduring trap.